Check, check. There it is.
Hello and welcome.
Welcome in. Welcome in. Did I do it right that time?
Yeah.
Okay.
You always
Last week I messed that up apparently.
Yeah, last week you kind of just stared at me and I wasn't really sure what to say because you usually pick up the pieces right there.
So sorry.
It's all right. It's all right. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're really excited about this episode.
Got a good episode tonight.
It is going to be a good episode. We have asked you guys for questions, for topics that you'd like to hear about regarding this. Prior to me even starting a podcast, this was one of the most requested conversations people wanted to hear. And I think I've been a little just not scared, it's not the right word, but a little nervous to just do it. I think this is episode 15 and I'm just now okay, let's do it. But it's a very touchy conversation, and to be honest, church culture has put this hush over this conversation so much that I think that that is one of the main reasons why so many people were like, hey, if you're doing a marriage kind of podcast, can you talk about sex, please? Can you talk about this? Because there's people struggling. There's people who feel lost. There's people who they didn't really get what they deserved in conversation when they were younger. And so now that is manifesting in marriage.
Yep.
And we're actually going to talk about that tonight too. So buckle up, get ready. If this conversation about sex triggers you, we respect if you're not ready to listen to this, but we also think that if you know people who you think this conversation could benefit from, then send them this.
Yep.
And share it. And we hope that it's beneficial. I try not to give this persona of oh, Wes and I are just so wise and we just know what we're talking about and we just have all the answers.
Yeah, no.
Because that's not the case. But I think why I feel like we should talk about it is because Wes and I feel very strongly about talking about things that other people are uncomfortable talking about. And that is why so many of you have reached out to us and said that you love our podcast so much. And so when there are times where I'm I don't know, should we talk about it? Anytime I'm feeling that sort of type of way, someone always sends me a message out of the blue, just thanking me for being raw, for being vulnerable, for having these kinds of conversations, for bringing light to them. I really don't want people to think that we're going to get on here and just be vulgar and talk about just nasty, dirty sex conversations that make people cringe. But
Maybe in the future.
Maybe in the future. Or no. If the word sex does make you uncomfortable, then maybe you should listen to this. Maybe you should open up yourself to conversations that maybe you've not had before.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk a little bit about this tonight, but I think the main reason why a lot of Christians in general, the Christian world, do get uncomfortable talking about sex is because of the way the church or leaders in the church have talked about sex for us.
Or not talked about sex.
Yes. From a young age for us. So anybody in that 18 to 40-year-old, 18 to 35-year-old range, that age group, we all learned growing up, don't talk about sex. If you do talk about sex,
talk about how it's bad.
You're going to get STDs or STIs now, whatever. And yeah, don't do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's jump in because some of you guys did send us some questions.
Woo!
And so
these questions are a lot more, they're not what I was expecting.
Wes thought it was gonna be like,
I've listened. Some of
ha
my
ha, funny. Let's talk about sex.
some of my friends
giggle,
out
giggle.
there, you know, I never know what they're gonna send in. So,
But these were pretty deep, like solid questions.
I like these questions.
Yeah, and so
Some of them I can't answer, but
it's okay. We're gonna do the best we can. So one of the questions we got was like growing up in church, ministry, whatever, and having all of these very strict boundaries and rules based like placed on you as a young person.
what I was just talking about.
Correct. Like one of the questions was like how does that affect intimacy in marriage? And one of the first things that I'll say is, and Wes and I both feel this way, that all stems from purity culture. And if you're unaware of what that is, it's especially if you grew up in the Bible Belt, grew up in church, purity culture is basically all they do is hound you about how do not have sex. Your virginity is a prize. Wear a purity ring. None of those things are bad.
No.
But it was the culture of sex is so bad.
Yep.
Stay as far away from it as possible. Deny your sex drive. Don't acknowledge that you have one. Shove it all the way down until you say I do. And then
Pleasure's bad.
yes.
Like all of this stuff.
And then when you say I do, then you need to turn it on, and now you can have sex whenever, however, whatever, like just go for it and make a bunch of babies. And that has been, from what we've seen, nothing good has come out of that. Now I say nothing good has come out of that. Like Wes and I were both in pretty heavy purity culture as young kids. Our marriage is beautiful. We have a good marriage that has come. I'm not saying like nothing good ever comes, but Wes and I had to unlearn a lot of things. So it's not like you'll never have a good marriage if that's what you came from. That's not true. But it is going to be a challenge.
Yep.
And there are going to be things you have to deeply work through that I believe you probably shouldn't have had to go through had I not been so immersed in like just heavy purity culture that basically, and I talked a little bit about this if you've listened to my episode on my addiction to porn, you'll know that like I just had to think, well, number one, I thought so poorly of myself because I thought sex drive is bad, sex drive is bad, sex drive is bad, which stems a lot from just that purity culture. But how does those kind of boundaries, I don't even like to say boundaries because boundaries are like a good thing. More so like the rules and like that kind of culture when that's placed on you as a young person, like how does that affect your intimacy? Number one, like I said, purity culture, it is just toxic. It's not good for how you view yourself. I think it's harmful to you and your spouse to feel like you have all of these rules and all of these things are so bad. And now I have to be extremely intimate with another person while I'm dealing with all these harmful thoughts about sex. Because what purity culture has done is given us a false reality of sex in general.
Correct.
Now I'm supposed to be doing this act with someone, but I view this act so poorly. And it's supposed to be someone that I love.
Correct.
But I can't even love this act because I've been taught that it's so bad.
Yeah, in one night, you're supposed to turn on everything that you have been taught, or you're supposed to turn on, let me say it this way, you're supposed to turn off everything that you've been taught for the past 20 to 30 years.
Yeah.
Depending on when you got married. In one night, you're supposed to just shove all that to the side and be
It's
like,
not bad anymore.
it's not bad.
Yeah.
I'm married now. It's okay.
Yeah.
And then you see a lot of people who, I mean, they can't.
Yeah.
They can't have sex with their spouse.
And they can't be intimate.
They can't be intimate. Like they can have sex, but they can't be intimate with their spouse.
And there's a difference.
Yes, there's a big difference.
There's a big difference in intimacy and sex.
Yes.
Just want to throw that out there.
Yes, I agree with that.
But you're right. Like because of all of that and having to turn all of a sudden this sex is good now mentality, it causes a lot of people to not be able to do that. There's been no progression of understanding sex, valuing sex prior to marriage, because I think you can do that. I think there is a healthy way to value sex, to understand sex, to be a sexual being without going and sleeping with people.
Yeah. And let's clarify this. We're not saying purity is bad.
No, that's
We're
not what I'm
saying
saying.
being pure is bad or wrong or weird or anything like that. We are saying the culture behind what the church and ministry put on purity for years is toxic.
Yeah. Well, I think too, like, it gave us this idea of like, intimacy is for your spouse. This is for your spouse. And Wes and I believe that it is. I personally don't think it is good for you to go and try to be intimate with a person that you really shouldn't be being intimate with. I don't think it is good for you to have sex with lots of people and then all of a sudden try to just be intimate with just one person forever, because Wes and I, neither one of us were virgins when we got married, and that did cause harm in the early stages of our marriage, because there's comparison, there's like tension, there's doubt, there's insecurity, there's false reality. Like, well, this is what it's looked like before, so this is what it needs to look like now.
Yep.
Or
the vice versa of that, which we dealt with too, of like before we got married, everything was like this. It was mysterious. It was sneak.
This hush
yes,
taboo
like
thing.
it was. It's secretive. It's like
and
there's an excitement. There's an adrenaline rush behind all of that, and then all of a sudden you get married, and you can have sex whenever you want. Especially if you get married young, you don't have kids, you can have sex whenever you want. Now you have to figure out, okay,
was I turned on by the mysteriousness?
Yeah.
Like, was it just fun and I wanted to do it because it was taboo and I shouldn't have been doing it? Or am I turned on, or am I enjoying this because I'm married and I love this person?
Correct.
Yeah.
But you have to figure that out
Yeah.
of now, like, there's not really a mystery behind it anymore. There's not this.
So it's like starting over.
Yeah. Even though once you do figure it out, it is 10 times better.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying that it's like sex is better because it's like when it's mysterious. Like, I'm not saying that. But there was that mindset as a 21-year-old, 22-year-old, however old I was when we got married. And then we had to figure that out of like, wait a second, this is, it's good, but this is different.
Yeah.
And now we've got to figure this out and how to work through all of this.
Now we've got to actually connect.
Yeah. Now there is an
intimacy that we
and
have
a connection
to create.
that we've got to figure out.
Correct. Rather than just like we're hyped up on like, ooh, we can't do this, so it's taboo. And now we're like, well, we want to do this, but we can't do this. And that's what created all of that, like that energy and that adrenaline and that excitement. And then all of a sudden it goes to, like he said, marriage. And now you're like, well, I can do this whenever I want. How do I connect with you over this?
Yep.
And so I do think that it creates what I think, and I was talking to Wes about this earlier, I think what that kind of culture does is it creates a lack of security in your sexuality. And I don't mean, am I gay? Am I not? Like, that's not what I mean by sexuality, as much as I mean like being a
sexual human.
Being a sexual being.
Being
like,
a human.
Yeah, like having pleasures prior to marriage, like having feelings prior to marriage. Like when we are so taught that all of those things are bad, that sex drives are bad until you get married, that you shouldn't want this until you get married, that you should shove it down until you get married. I am no longer secure in my sexuality, in my desire for sex. I'm no longer secure when I look in the mirror and want to be sexy prior to marriage, because I do think women, even if they're not married, should look at themselves and feel sexy and feel beautiful and be confident in their sexuality. But because I've been taught all of this, now I'm insecure in that. And I think it also creates a lack of security in sex in general. Like, if you have been taught that all of this is bad for so long, and then all of a sudden you get married, you're not secure in, like, are you good in bed? Which is not like it's not like a prerequisite.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need to be the best. And trust me, when you first get married, you're most likely not gonna be. Like, you're figuring it out together. And the way Wes and I had sex when we first got married compared to the way we have sex now going on to year 7, it is 15 times better now than it was then.
Yep.
Because of the connection that we've made, and we've learned what each other likes, and we've learned what helps us grow outside of the marriage bed. Like, we've learned all of those things, so sex is better. But when you are constantly told this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, and then all of a sudden you get in your honeymoon and you're like, I don't think I can do that. I don't think I'm going to be good. I'm going to be bad at this. I'm not going to be good at this. And then how are you supposed to, like, please each other when you just feel like you suck or that you don't know what you're doing? And I think the truth is, it's like, it's okay if you go in there and be like, I don't really know. Like, do you like this? Should I try this? Is this okay? And, like, things that I was so not okay with early in our marriage, like, I am okay with now, because as we've grown, like, we've just learned, where I thought I was really bad or that I wasn't going to be good at this, we've had to grow together, if that makes sense. But I think a lot of the reason why I thought, I'm going to be bad at this, I'm not going to be good, I can't please a man, is because I was taught that, like, sex is bad. So I had no security in that.
And that's even though prior to marriage, you know, we weren't virgins coming into marriage. And that's even with having sex before marriage, coming into it, you were still like,
yeah,
wait a second, even though I've done this already, I'm still not sure.
Yeah. Well, because it looks so, like you said, it was so taboo and mysterious. And like, prior to being married, it was this isn't everyone's story, but my story was a broken girl looking for someone to validate me and make me feel loved. Yep. So when I would have sex, it was purely out of either I need to feel something because I'm broken, or I want to be loved because I'm broken. So it was never I want to please this person because I love them. It always had another agenda to it. Yeah. Then you get into a marriage where you deeply love someone and you actually do want to please them sexually. But then I'm just looking like, I never cared about this before. I don't know what I'm doing. Like, how do I know if I'm good at this? And like, early in our marriage, it was constantly questions like, is this okay? Are you good? Like, even sometimes now I'll be like, are you okay? And he's like, why are you asking me if I'm okay? I'm like, I don't know. I just feel like I'm supposed to check on you. Like, I don't know what's going on. But I do feel like that stemmed from some of the culture that we were surrounded by. And I'm not saying like our parents taught us this. It was just the culture and growing up in a Bible Belt. And like going to like health class in the Bible Belt, it was like, don't have sex because you'll get an STD. But then it was also, we were in the Bible Belt. So it was also
I didn't really
like
have health class. So
Jesus.
I mean, I had a health class.
Y'all didn't talk about sex?
I basically skipped health class. No, my health class was one of my football coaches. So
Jesus.
No, I literally would just go to my mom's room and sit there.
Jesus. No, they legitimately were like, don't have sex, you'll get STDs. But then also there was still that culture of like, it's bad. And because it was such a Bible Belt, it was like everyone was like, well, if you have sex, you're going to hell. Like, it was one of those things.
Yep.
But everybody was having sex. All the teenagers were having sex. We just all didn't know how to talk about it because we were in the Bible Belt, you know?
Correct.
So that's how I feel, what Wes and I feel like intimacy can be disrupted in those ways. And that is why I think we've seen so much downward spiral of sex in marriages coming from purity culture, because it hasn't been talked about. It's been framed extremely poorly. And now you've got people having sex because that's what they were told to do when they got married. But there's a huge lack of intimacy, and people don't know how to be real and vulnerable and feel sexy and all of those things.
Or now it's just a procreation thing.
Yeah.
And there's no, like you said, there's no connection. There's no sexiness,
Fun.
spice,
Yeah.
fun, whatever you want to call it. Like, there's none of that. It's just, okay, we're doing this.
Yeah.
You know, because that's what it's not necessarily what purity culture taught, but it's what a lot of people got from it.
Yeah.
Like, because, I mean, I've talked to people that growing up in that type of culture, and then you get married and it's like, well, I don't really know what's okay, what's not okay.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, so scrap everything. This is just for, there's no pleasure. There's no intimacy there. It's just procreation.
I've had conversations with friends recently who have said, I don't know what to do. I've been told that having sex like this is sinful. I'm like what? And they're like, well, doing this while like having sex is sinful. And I just am like, I like gasp. I'm like, people have literally gotten into your head to try to tell you that what you and your spouse do in your own marriage bed is sinful. Like, it is so disrupted our way of even thinking about marriage, where we're afraid to even test the waters in our marriage bed. We're afraid to go the extra mile or do something fun or try something different or like be sexy or foreplay longer or whatever it is. The church has even tried to get into our marriages in that way. And it's caused so many problems. And I just hope that this episode can heal some people, because the amount of counseling that I've had to do with people, like young girls who are married, who are deeply afraid to do things with their spouse because they think that they're going to go to hell.
Yep.
Or they think that they're sinning. I'm not saying that these girls, I'm like, you're dumb. I'm saying, how dare the church try to even get into the marriages and tell people what they can and can't do in their marriage bed. Now, I'm not saying, let me just be very vulgar right here. If you having threesomes in your marriage, we got a whole other issue going on there. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like trying different things. You want to foreplay in certain ways. You want to pleasure each other in different ways. I'm so tired of the world saying your marriage has to look like missionary, make your babies, and be godly. There's healing that can take place if you would just let you and your spouse do this together. Now, how do we do that? How do you and your spouse navigate through these kinds of things?
That's what I was going to ask.
Communication is huge.
And I'm going to go and say this. Communication is the theme throughout all of these questions.
All of them.
All the questions that were asked. Communication is the linchpin of
It's going to be the backbone
marriage
of
in
sex
general.
in your
Well,
marriage.
Just in marriage in general.
Oh, well, yeah.
Yes. But
But
obviously,
we're talking about sex.
Yes. So having good communication, being able to talk to each other, that's the theme going throughout all
So-
of this.
Let's talk about some things that you need to communicate about. What you like in the marriage bed, what you like in sex, what you don't like.
That's a big one.
It is huge. And I'm not being funny. If
No.
there is something you do not like your spouse doing,
Tell
freaking
'em.
say it.
Yeah.
Because you're going to end up resenting them because you're not enjoying sex and they have no idea.
Or it turns into I don't say there's something I do that you don't like, but you don't tell me. Then you start, I keep doing this thing. You start turning me down, and the gaps between us being intimate with each other gets longer and longer in between each time.
All because I didn't want you to do that.
Correct. Then I start resenting you.
Correct.
Because I'm like, what is going on? We're not being intimate anymore. And now I resent you
Yep.
because you're resenting me because we didn't
Yeah,
talk about
because
it.
there was no
and then there's the
communication.
whole thing that goes on top of all of that.
Yeah.
And
And I think here's something, and I wrote this down like twice in our notes. Here's the goal in your marriage and in this conversation. Sex with your spouse regularly is the goal.
yes.
That's the goal. It's not the only thing. It is not the only thing in marriage,
No.
but it is a huge part of it. It keeps you connected. It's biblical. Like, it keeps you like on the same page. It keeps you intimate. It breaks down your walls if you let it. It heals you. It brings like there's so many things. Sex is good. It was created for good. The goal of your marriage through this podcast, what we're talking about, is to have sex more regularly.
Regularly.
How you do that is communication so that you can have sex on a regular basis. Healthy, good sex. Communication is how we get there in so many areas. What you like, what you don't like. And I say what you like in sex, what you don't like in sex, what you like in the everyday life, what you don't like in everyday life. One of the questions somebody asked us is sex in marriage a want or a need? Wes immediately, when I read him the
It's a
question,
need.
he went, a need. And I laughed and I was like, yes. But I also said it's both.
Yeah.
I think
Oh,
it
of
should
course.
be a want,
Yes.
but I do think it's a need. I think it's necessary. I think it is for the benefit of your marriage in so many different ways. And I think, and I'll start with why it's a need and a want for women.
Well, I'm going to say this real quick, and then you can go into that, because I just thought about this. It is a need in the marriage. When you say I do, sex, intimacy, if it is just a need, that is when you get into the territory of there's no intimacy, and it turns into a like I was talking about earlier, where it's just a job, basically. It turns into this.
Well, we have to do this.
Yes. Or we do this just to have kids. Or we do this just because, it's biblically that's how you seal the marriage bond. And that's like all of this stuff. Without the want in there with it, I think it's hard to have the intimacy. It's hard to have the connection with your spouse, because if I don't want to have sex with you, or if I don't want to have sex at all because my sex drive is out the window and I don't have one, then it's hard for us to just connect outside of them.
Well, our bodies were created for sex.
Yeah.
They were. They were created to feel pleasure. They were created to be sexual. So if there is a lack of want there, that doesn't mean there's not a lack of need, because your
Correct.
body does need that. Like,
Correct.
it's good for your body. And you can look up, I've read so many different things on the actual benefits scientifically of having sex.
Yeah.
And your body does need sex. The issue is, and we get into this a little bit of like, why is this a need for women? For women, it's a need because, and I won't put like heavy numbers on this, but I would say more women will err on the side of physically, women don't need sex physically. Women could probably go without the actual act of sex for way longer periods of time than men. Not all, some. The way that the chemicals in our brain work as women, most of the time, we value sex for the deeper emotional connection. That is not always the case. Some women are different, and I totally get that. But there are scientific research. There is scientific research to back up the fact that women do have a more emotional connection to sex than most men do.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that not all men feel that way, because a
Right.
lot of men also value the emotional connection of sex. But I feel like for me and a lot of women that I talk to, sex is important and it is a need because there is an emotional connection. There are certain hormones that are released during that sex that bond us to them. So I could feel some type of way about you and our marriage and feel like we're being distant. But the second that we are intimate, I do feel my walls come down a little bit. I do feel like I'm safe in a healthy place. I do not mean you were manipulated into having sex and it was a quickie and now it's over and you're looking at your spouse wanting to smother them with a pillow. Like, I hope you enjoyed that. I mean a deep actual like connection with your spouse in having sex.
Yeah.
And then you have this emotional wall that kind of comes down where you can actually connect with them. And I think that's necessary for a healthy marriage. Like, I need that for our marriage so that I can actually keep loving you and like keep wanting to hang out with you and keep parenting with you and keep doing life with you. Because without that, we are roommates who just pay bills and watch kids.
Correct.
And so for a woman like me, I need that for our relationship to get stronger. But I know, and like you can talk more on this, guys aren't always like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's any time you have sex, there's always an emotional,
Right.
like it's almost impossible to take out the emotion
Right.
behind sex. Can you do that? I'm sure you can. But like,
I feel like people could probably say, no, I don't feel like you can totally have sex without emotion. I feel like there's got to be a small piece somewhere.
there's always an emotional connection
Yeah.
somewhere during that. But for men, I do think it leans more towards the physical act of sex. I think, number one, for me in general, like we were talking earlier tonight about, like when some people feel anxiety and depression and stuff like that, they can't, like, the act of touching makes them go deeper into that. For me, it's the opposite. When I start feeling anxious, I need somebody to hold me. I need somebody to hug me. I need somebody to just grab my hand and be like, sometimes I don't even have to say anything, but like that physical touch of that.
I think a lot of that is more men are very physical and visual.
Yes, 100%.
That's the way they were wired.
Yes.
They're very visual, physical people. Like,
yes.
they lean on that.
Yeah. So when it comes to sex, like, for me to feel connected, or for men to feel connected, I'm not going to say that. for most men, I think. I don't have the exact numbers, but for most men, from my perspective, the physical act of sex and being intimate with your spouse is what that connection is.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, I mean, there is emotion there, obviously, but it's just the act of we're close, we are one, we are in this together. Like, there's something beautiful about that, but there's something entangling about that pulls me closer to you. Again, yes, that connection is there, but for men, it's more of just how close can we get in this moment, which is going to help me feel closer tomorrow when we get in a fight, or in a few days when we're not quite on the same page and we're trying to figure this out. I know in the back of my head that, like, we're okay still.
You're going to hear us say the words communicate probably 9 million times in this episode. But expressing your needs, your wants, like, for me to say, listen, I need to have sex with you this week. Like, I need that. I'm feeling, I've said that to you. I am feeling so disconnected from you. Like, I don't feel like you see me. I don't feel like you care. I feel like we've been so busy. I feel like you look past me. I need to have sex with you. And like, that need is, you could say easily, well, that you just want to have sex. And I get, you could say that.
The one is there, yes.
Because there is a want and a desire for that. But a lot of times when you add want to sex, people immediately lean on the side of they want to feel good sexually.
Yeah.
You just want to feel good in sex. When I look at him and say, I need this from you this week, that is a deep cry from like our marriage. I need this. I need to feel close to you. And I don't think there's anything wrong with expressing that. And like, that communication will save you in your most dire times of marriage.
And we're going to get into that a little more.
Yeah.
Here in a little while.
Okay, so another question. We're going to use communicates the answer to this one too. Are you ready?
I don't remember the order of all these, so.
How do you turn each other on in a healthy way without manipulation in your marriage? Communicate.
Communicate.
Okay, so one of the things I wrote down, like, communicate a few things. Number one, communicate what turns you on. So if you're actually trying to physically turn someone on, for example, I'm exhausted. I don't want to have sex. I've not even brought it up. Wes wants to. He's trying. And let me just say this. And Wes can attest to this, and he's even said this. He's the one that said it that made me put it in the notes. Turning someone on doesn't just have to be physical.
Yeah, okay. Yes.
Like,
I see where you're going with this.
Where it starts.
Yeah.
Okay? If he has been a hateful turd to me all day long, and then we crawl in bed that night, and he's like, come on, and he starts trying to do physical things that he knows will turn me on sexually, there is still a disconnect in my brain that doesn't work.
Yep.
Now, for a guy, I could be a butt to you all day long, but the second I do something that turns you on physically, you're like, oh, it's fine. I forgive you. Let's go. That's not how it is for me. And I know it's not the same way for a lot of women.
Yep.
A lot of times, foreplay, not just physical foreplay, but the pre-act of sex leading up to sex starts
The day before.
the day before.
The morning of.
Correct. The morning
It
of.
starts the way you talk to that person that morning. It starts a text throughout the day.
Yeah.
It's like when I get home from work, do I help with the girls? When I get home from work, am I helping do the dishes? Am I helping clean up around the house?
Feeding that love language that we
Correct.
talked about before.
Correct. Is she physical touch? Am I giving that to her? Is
Do the
she words
dishes
of
need to be
affirmation?
done?
Am I
And-
giving
yeah.
that to her? Like, am I doing the things outside of the bedroom
to make her feel loved and make her feel good.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because again, for women, like she said, it is an emotional connection
For the most part.
For the
Yes.
most part.
I keep saying that because I don't want
I
anyone
know.
to be like offended
I
and be
know.
like,
Because
wow,
there-
she just is stereotyping all these women.
There
I'm saying for
are-
the most part, from what I've counseled and what I know.
I mean, there are outliers in both men and women.
Correct.
So like you can't, like, we're not making a blanket statement
No.
over men and women. But
But we are speaking from our experience. So
Yes.
I cannot relate to a woman who is a physical being. Like I am more emotional.
Yeah.
So I'm going to speak from what I know.
Correct. But to make it work inside the bedroom, you have to make that emotional connection outside of the bedroom.
Yeah.
Because again, if I have a bad day, right? And everybody's entitled to their bad days.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm not saying that. But if I have a bad day at work and like I'm tired, I've been to the gym, but like I had a long day at work, and then like I come home and the girls are crazy and like all this stuff, and I was just like neglecting you still. I didn't come home and help around the house. Like we haven't talked all day, and I just come home, I eat dinner, I sit on the couch, and we go to bed. And then I try to, get handsy or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be a disconnect for her
Mm-hmm.
or for the woman for the most part, because there's not been an emotional connection all day
Mm-hmm.
or for the past 2 days or what the last week. Like you can't just, as men in general, we can't just expect. I'm still learning this because I have tried that. I've had a bad day. I've come home. I'm tired. Clark has asked me 10 million questions. Potter's climbing on my head. You're cooking dinner. We eat. We sit down. We both watch a movie or something, but we don't talk. We've talked through 4 text messages all day, and it's been about work or the girls or something. And then we get in bed, and I'm like, I want to have sex because I feel like I need it right now because I'm like, whatever.
I'm empty. I need connection.
Yes.
Whatever.
But you don't have any connection to me at all because I've been so distant because I was tired. Then I'm not going to get what I want or need because I didn't give you what you needed outside of the bedroom. And again, that does go both ways.
Yeah.
But I do think that leans more towards the woman side
Yeah.
because
It
obviously
does.
it does go both ways in the sense of if you are being a butt to me, like I do expect an apology.
Yeah.
Like I do expect an apology of some sort. But like it's probably
But normally, if we have sex, then my walls come down, and then I'm more apt to give one after
Correct.
that. Because prior to sex, I would have women deal with that thing where they don't really want to apologize, and then afterwards, my walls have come down. And I'll be like, "Oh yeah, I was sorry about earlier."
But yeah, I do think it comes down to communication.
Yep.
What you like.
What you like
don't like.
physically, what you don't like physically, what you like emotionally, what you don't like emotionally.
What you expect help around the house.
Yeah.
That's a big thing.
And that's how you do that without manipulation or making each other feel bad. And here's what I will say. It is not bad. So like I used that example a second ago. If Wes really wants to have sex and I don't, it's not a bad thing for him to try. It's not a bad thing for him to ask. I don't think it's a bad thing for him to be like, I'll do whatever you want. Like, do you know what I mean, though? Like, I don't think it's a bad thing that they really want to and they don't. The first day that Wes comes home and says, can we have sex? And I'm like, no, not tonight. And he just is like, okay, and walks away. I'm going to sign us up for marriage counseling. Like, he's given up. Like, I'm deeply concerned. And that's not like a game of like cat and mouse. Like we're not playing a game, ladies, where we're like making him chase us around and do what we want. Like, But if the first time I'm like, no, not tonight, and he's just like, fine, I'm gonna be like, wait, are you okay? Like, I don't think it's a bad thing that they do want to try. They do. And if you have a spouse who is actively trying, and not just trying to get you in the bed, but actively trying to love you well, to do the things that you want, and you just don't want to have sex, like, give your spouse some credit for not giving up and throwing in the towel. Because here's the reality, like we already said earlier. It's not a bad thing for them to try, because at the end of the day, the goal for your healthy marriage is to be having sex regularly. Mm-hmm. That is the goal. So, like, if they're trying and they're doing what they feel like they need to do, like to love you well and to try to have sex with you, like, it's not a bad thing. And so let's talk about, someone has asked, like, let's talk about how to have healthy expectations and what are some healthy expectations in marriage. So me and you were talking about this earlier over dinner, just kind of going through some of these questions, and you asked me.
There's two ways to look at this question. Healthy expectations of the how often, how, like, once a week, once a month, 3-4 times a week. Like, what's the, how, like, what is that expectation? And then there's also the expectation of how simple or how
wild we get.
How wild is this about to get?
Yeah.
So, like, there's two ways to look at that question, but
my response to Wes in that moment was, I think both of those things are okay to ask.
Oh,
in regards to,
I think those are important
expectations.
Questions. I think those are important questions, because especially if, I mean, when you come into a marriage, you are two different people. Mm-hmm. You have two different backgrounds for the most part. You were raised two different ways for the most part.
You have two different sex drives.
You have two different sex drives. You have two different sets of parents that raised you. Like, when you coming into a marriage, for the most part, you're going to have slightly different views on sex.
Yeah.
So, coming into a marriage, I could come in and say, all right, my expectations for this is we're going to have wild, crazy sex 4 to 5 times a week. And you could come in saying, I'm good with 4 times a month. And it's like, or 3 times a month or whatever. And it's like, okay, how do we come up with expectations together?
Yeah.
To get through this.
And you know how you do these expectations, how you get through these?
You talk about it.
Communicate. Honestly.
And I think that this is something that should be done before marriage.
Yeah. It definitely needs to be a conversation in premarital counseling. It
doesn't need to be done alone. Definitely could lead down some rabbit holes to the bedroom before marriage. So I definitely wouldn't do this alone, especially if you're trying to not sleep together before marriage.
Here's the truth too, is like, only you and your spouse know what kind of expectations you both need to be looking at. Yeah. Like, if you're looking to us for, like, well, Emily, Wes, how many times do you think? How often do you think that we should be having sex? How often should married couples be having sex? Bro, that's up to you. Like, that is your decision. And what I would say is, like,
because I mean, to be frank, I know of happily married couples who, from all ages, from ages 20 to 25 to 30 to 35 to 50, like, I know all of them where they have sex once a month, once every 2 months, and everything's fine, because that's what they've set up, and they're good. They love each other. They find their connection. They find their intimacy there, and that's all that they need, because that's the way they're both wired, or that's the way they've figured it out, right? I also know people who have sex 4 to 5 times a week.
Period.
Because that's the way that they have to do it. there's not a right or wrong answer to this.
I
I think you should lean more towards more? I think so.
I think so, for
But
connection,
that doesn't
intimacy
mean that
purposes.
it's right or wrong.
I will say, if you are married to someone who does value connection in the marriage bed, sex is valuable to them. For example, Wes, someone who does value, he needs that more. I'm like this also, but I'm just using this as an example. But I'm someone who's like, no, once a month's good for me. Wes doesn't, how do I say this? I don't get to just say, well, you need to suppress how you feel and we're going to have sex once a month.
Correct.
Because that's all I really want.
Correct.
When he needs sex at least once a week, if not more, for connection purposes. Because I feel fine over here. This is not the truth. I'm just using this as an example. Pretending that I feel fine over here once a month's good for me, but my spouse is dying on the inside because my spouse, I had a lisp. My spouse is dying on the inside because he doesn't feel connected to me. I think when you communicate, that's why Wes said it is good to have a marriage counselor, someone present who can help you navigate these things, because at the end of the day, you do have to come to a medium understanding.
Correct.
You do need to make sure that one feels loved and connected. And I think that's important. I don't even think that just for sex. I think in general, like, you only want to go on a date once a month, but your spouse needs to sit and talk and connect
once a week.
You
gotta figure that out.
Suck it up. Like,
Yeah.
you're going to have to do it.
I mean, that's marriage in a nutshell. Like,
yeah.
Again, you come from two different backgrounds.
Correct.
So it doesn't matter whether it's in the marriage bed. It doesn't matter on if it's how you eat every week. Like, one person grew up eating out all the time. One person grew up eating out, once a month. Those are compromises. Those are things you have to talk about and figure out, how do we, as a family unit, as a married couple, how do we work?
And I think the biggest thing within that is putting in the work.
100%.
You have to put in the work. If you want to connect with your spouse, for example, maybe you are a couple who's having sex once a month, but you don't feel connected. You're going to have to put in the work to be more present sexually with your spouse. And I do not suggest that if you are a couple who is having sex once a month, I do not suggest you sitting down with them tomorrow and deciding to have sex 3 times a week moving forward.
No, that's not going to work.
It's not going to work. I think it's going to overload both of you. I think it's going to be too much. It's going to be too much pressure. But I do think you can take steps to maybe moving it up to 3 times a month, and then eventually maybe once a week. And getting to a place with your spouse where you're putting in the work to connect, to be intimate, to try to navigate, like, this is more challenging on me, but I also recognize that this is what my spouse needs, and I need to figure out a way to make this okay. And I will say, if your spouse is coming to you all the time wanting to have sex and your answer is always no, you need to put in the work to figure that out.
Yeah.
Do you not feel emotionally connected to them, and that's why? Then you as a couple need to put in the work to get emotionally connected. Do you have resentment toward your spouse and that's why you don't? Then you need to go to marriage counseling and figure that out. Do you have an extremely low sex drive and can't feel pleasure and can't get turned on? Then you need to go to a doctor and figure out why that is so low. Yep. Because it could be chemical. The thing about, like I've said this over and over, the goal is to be more intimate with your spouse. So figure out why and put in the work. Don't just be satisfied with, well, this is just how I am. I just don't ever want to. Why not?
Yep.
And put the work in to figure out why and change it so that you can be better for your spouse, for your family, for you, for your marriage. Like, figuring out why so that you can connect is always going to be healthy. And I think too, like navigating, like this is a communication, obviously, again, but foreplay, connecting and talking about foreplay. What does that look like? Where does that start? Does it start the morning of and it goes all day? Is it something that you need?
It does.
Yes.
There's no question about that.
Yes.
Like, it does.
But communicating about that, like, hey, this start, like, I feel more connected to you when you flirt with me in the morning. On the other side of foreplay, not just emotional foreplay, physical foreplay, communicating about what you're okay with, what you're not okay with, but also learning, and I'm going to hurt myself when I say this, selflessness is huge in sex. Selflessness is huge in marriage, but it doesn't change in the bedroom.
Correct.
I think there are certain things that maybe you're not okay with right now. Maybe you're early in your marriage. You're still trying to figure things out. And you're like, I don't really know that I'm ready for this yet. And those are conversations you can have. And those are things that should be respected. But there's also things that like your spouse loves that you may need to just swallow your pride and do. And not be so selfish and saying, well, I just don't really want to do that. Well, I don't really want to sweep my floors, but sometimes it needs to be done and it's good for my house. So if I love my person, and it may not be my favorite thing to do in the world, but they enjoy it, there are times where I need to be selfless. And I think that goes into, if you can figure out selflessness in your marriage, you can figure out selflessness in sex.
Correct.
So yeah, thank you guys so much for listening, and we love you. Do the thing.
Like, comment, subscribe, leave us a review on Apple and Spotify. Jump in the comments on YouTube.
Absolutely.
Find us on Instagram. Check There It Is Podcast.
And this is going to be continued.
Yep.
So find us next week for part 2 of our sex conversation.
Boom. Love you guys.
Love you guys. Bye.